All right, everybody, we have a UFC 313 recap pod here coming. Saturday night was a bit unfortunate to say the least. I'm joined by Son here. I know he's probably not too happy. His fellow Brazilian goes down. But we're here to talk about the card, talk about potential next matchups, and kind of touch on some points. To start this off, I want to preface by saying one thing. The days of you have to, completely best the champ to be the champ, or it's not a thing anymore. So that argument sucks to say. That's kind of out the window. The one thing I will say about that argument is if you don't definitively beat up the champ, chances are you'll probably get that immediate rematch. And I think that is where we're going with Alex Pereira. Son, I'll let you touch on this a little bit. Any takeaways from that fight, and what do you think happens next in that division?
Yeah, I mean, top of the head, first thing that comes to mind is obviously the judging. I think, first of all, before I get into this, I think there's a lot of people dying on that Alex Pereira hill, maybe a little bit too hard. I mean, he's by far my favorite fighter, and I can still see that scorecard going to Ankalaev. However, I will, kind of turn back and say the days, just completely agreeing with what you're saying. I keep thinking back when Adesanya was a champion, the way his fights were scored. A lot of the times he won fights just because the challenger didn't do enough. And that's what I clearly remember that, that championship era. He was a champion that, you'd see some fights, sometimes some rounds he would even get outstruck and out wrestled and whatnot. And they would feed him those rounds and count the points towards him. Which, I was kind of pissed when it was happening back then. But now that, I kind of have a bias going towards the champion and I'm kind of seeing it how it is now. Did Ankalaev do enough on Saturday to become the light heavyweight champion? I don't think so. Now, did he, arguably win and like squeak in the win in the fight? Yeah, but we're talking about a championship fight. And I think that, the perspective you got to have on that fight, especially in the judging side, has to be a little bit cautious of, the exact scorecard and what it looks like on paper. And even if you do look at it on paper, what was it? 0 for 16 on takedowns. I almost think that, failed takedowns and you get enough takedowns that are unsuccessful and you do absolutely nothing with them, and especially when you're getting stuffed 16 times in a fight. I think, at some point, those points almost have to start going towards, the defender of those takedowns. I mean,
Yeah. So you stuffed. I think it was 12 for 12. Stuffed all 12, but it did lead to some control time for Ankalaev. And I think what really got the judges to score some of these rounds in his way was his forward pressure. Because you look at it, and I don't necessarily disagree where you're like, okay, you stuffed all 12. What does that weight in at? But when it leads into you, having control time against the cage and you're just the constant aggressor, where Alex wasn't really letting his hands fly, I think that's kind of where it comes into being like, how does this get scored? I will say, Sal D'Amato scoring this at 49-46. You never know what fight that guy's watching because we're clearly not watching the same fights when these things happen. But it is difficult for me to score it to Pereira when he landed, I think, 11 significant strikes to the head in 25 minutes. Like, damn, that's tough, man. Even though I do think you can make the arguments in round 1, 3, and 5 that he won those, I don't know. It's tough. But if you're looking at the whole landscape of the division, besides that rematch, I guess there's not really another fight to make besides, maybe Jan Blachowicz, since he lost a split to Pereira and he had that draw with Ankalaev. Like, he's the only other guy in there that's kind of deserving of fighting, up there. Maybe let him fight Yuri, and the winner of that can fight the winner of Pereira Ankalaev too. But yeah, it's a tough one to score, man. And looking at it, it sucks as a Pereira fan, but I just don't see where Pereira did enough to beat Ankalaev, even though you think it'd be the other way around with Ankalaev being the challenger,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, fully agree. I can't say I'm happy with the scorecard and how the fight played out. But, I can't get mad at the judges for scoring it towards Ankalaev. However, Sal D'Amato, I'm glad you touched on him. I always get, butterflies, or I guess sick to my stomach almost. That's more the feeling, I think, when I see Sal D'Amato scoring a big card like this and big fights like this. Yeah, if you had to sit me down and judge that fight, I probably would have put it for Ankalaev, not by as big a margin, given that extra point. Where I don't know where he got that extra point from. I don't think any round was, extremely impressive from either side. So, it did worry me just going into that fight. But, obviously the other two judges agreed, and in general, I do agree. But moving forward, with the division, I think obviously the first thing you have to do is get that rematch. That fight was far too close. I mean, Alex has been a super dominant champion. I don't think you can take away that opportunity from him. After that, though, and I'm just thinking from Alex Pereira's side, because obviously Ankalaev, if he does, win or lose the next fight, he's gonna keep climbing those rankings and keep getting that title shot back, especially after he just got it. I think Alex, he's got more than just this division, available to him. Obviously, there's the talks of the DDP fight, which that's pretty unlikely in my eyes. I can see it happening because Alex just likes to take these crazy fights apparently. I could see it happening, especially after he beat Adesanya and he called him out in the last fight. I would love to see that fight happen. I'd love to see how that would play out. But then also you got to think outside of just UFC. You have the Usyk call out. He did an interview and he called out. Obviously he's going to have to fight at least one more, actual boxing fight before he could, potentially take the Alex Pereira fight into boxing. And just recently, I think over the last week or two, Turkey and I don't know if you saw, but Turkey and Dana, yeah, they got together and they're now creating a little boxing federation branching out from the UFC side. So that's definitely something I can see, and that's definitely an option. And we got to think that he's not just a UFC fighter. I mean, he was a extremely high level kickboxer before. Do I think he beats Usyk? Absolutely not. I think Usyk's in a different planet when it comes to boxing. But
do you think that fight lost a little bit of the aura with Pereira losing his belt? And even on top of that, I don't know how many more fights Pereira has on his contract, but I don't think Dana's going to waste any of those by allowing him to go box unless it's like literally a retirement thing. And he's like, hey, either let me take this fight or I'm going to retire. My time's kind of ran out. And then Dana might be like, you know what, let me get a few more bucks out of this cash cow. But if it's not that kind of circumstances, I don't see Dana, letting that happen and letting Pereira go over and, kind of taking that risk.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if that fight lost any of its luster or anything. Because I think, that excitement of watching Alex Pereira as a fighter is his knockout ability, his striking, and that's what people really want to go and watch. Like this weekend, for example, nobody wants to watch him stuff takedowns and get backed up against the cage. And a lot of people would almost argue, and you see every challenger coming up to the belt, like Jamal Hill, for example, they're coming up and they're like, hey, I'm gonna stand and bang with this guy, and that's what the people want to see. That's what the fans want to see, and that's what ideally Alex Pereira wants to do. So I think as far as losing that luster just because he lost the belt, I don't think that belt gave him, the excitement that he brought. I think that was definitely an extra, and it was a good platform for him to be at and a good spot for him to be at in his career. But I wouldn't completely rule out the Usyk fight. He did jump from, the highest level of kickboxing straight into the UFC, just because Adesanya said something. And then he's been taking crazy fights, having crazy performances, on the feet, knocking people out left and right. I could see him making it. Obviously, not going to happen this year. If it does happen, it'll probably be next year after Usyk takes shoot, I forget who he'd want to fight, but he has a contender coming up to fight him to challenge him for one of his belts. And after that, he would technically be open for a fight. There's nothing on the horizon other than that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily doubt Pereira's ability to go into boxing. We've seen him sparring with, high level heavyweights and whatnot. So it's not even the ability that I'm like questioning. It's more so if they will make it happen. Because again, like I know Dana said I'm kind of done with letting my guys go over into boxing, even though it's not like he's done it a bunch of times, but he did come out and say that. So it's a matter of like all the circumstances, all the stars have to align where it almost seems like Pereira has to be retiring or his contract has to be up in order for Dana to, well, if the contract's up, then obviously he really has no say. But if he's still under contract, I feel like he kind of has to leverage retirement in order to get that fight with Usyk almost.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He definitely has a lot of work to do in the UFC still, and a lot of UFC fans that want to watch him in that cage. So I don't think he's completely done. I still see him getting a submission win in one of these next fights. I want it to happen. My wallet wants it to happen. I'm gonna bet it every fight. Just hoping for that, backdoor, guillotine just out of nowhere.
You know what
Somebody
he could
goes
have
for a
had that,
takedown.
bro? He could have had that in that first Yuri fight when he knocked Yuri down against the cage and Yuri
Yeah,
kind of just like limped down. If something like that, because Yuri was clearly stoned, if he were to have locked up a guillotine, I could see him subbing someone with a guillotine in a style like that. He damaged them with the left, they kind of drop down, maybe go to level change. I could see that happening actually.
100%. Especially with this Ankalaev matchup. I mean, you see him going for takedowns so much. I can see him wobbling him. He can come in for the takedown and just lock that guillotine in. It's just not what he's going to be expecting, and obviously not what he's going to be going for. So if the opportunity's there, I really think he can crank his neck off.
Yeah, I could see it happening. But moving on to the next fight, the co-main, big bounce back for Justin, the highlight Gaethje, getting that 29-28 UD over Rafael Fiziev. First round, honestly, looked exactly like the first round went in their first fight. And then you saw Justin start to pick it up. You saw him land that big knockdown and like towards the end of round 2, really solidify that round. And then round 3, he clearly won that round. So I'm happy for Justin, happy to see him back. That was a fun fight. But now I have a little bit of a problem with what they're going to do next with him. I really do. They went out and Dana White said, "Oh, there's a good shot. Justin Gaethje gets that shot next." Dude, how are you going to give Gaethje the title shot? Like, I understand. Oh, he just went and beat Rafael Fiziev, who's ranked. Well, what's Fiziev ranked? What was he like 12th in that division?
11, I think, 10.
11. Yeah. Let me look at this right now. Fiziev was
Yeah,
at
he's 11.
11. So you beat the 11th ranked guy who takes the fight on 2 weeks' notice, comes across the world after not fighting for about a year, coming off a KO loss to Max Holloway. I don't think he should get that title shot because I don't think he's more deserving than either Charles or Armin. He lost to Charles the last time they fought, and he's not. And Armin beat Charles. Both of those guys are more deserving than Justin Gaethje. But I feel like to give Gaethje or to give Islam some new blood. He's never fought Gaethje. He's beaten both Charles and Armin. It seems like Dana kind of wants to make that fight happen, but I disagree. I think he should either have to fight Charles or Armin in order to get that title shot.
Yeah, I agree. Not to mention, obviously the looming Ilia Topuria rumors, and obviously Ilia wants that fight directly. And like we mentioned on the podcast last time, it's something that I think is viable and fair for Ilia to ask on his part. So, there's 3 guys already just waiting for that contender shot. Although I will say Armin and Dana White said this himself, Armin does not look like he's going to get that title shot. That redemption fight, after pulling out last time on such short notice. I think it was, take it as a bad business practice or something of the like. I just don't think that Dana's going to reward him after what happened. We were hours away from the fight and he pulls out. And honestly, I think almost Charles should go straight up for that. And he should be the next in line, if not the Ilia Topuria fight. And I would almost, I wouldn't hate in Armin and
Armin and Justin, I
Charles
think,
fight.
yeah, you can make
Or
that fight, or I think you can make Armin and Justin, bro. Like, I think
honestly,
right
that
there,
is, yeah. I wasn't even thinking about that, but I
if,
absolutely agree. Like
if you're
that's
gonna
that's
say
that's
if you're gonna say
that's
Armin
what it
needs
would
to beat
be.
someone for the title shot, and Justin's apparently right there, I mean, why not make that your true eliminator? You do Armin versus Justin, and there you go. And then if Ilya goes and fights Islam, then you have Armin and Justin taking the winner of that. Charles kind of gets left in a little bit of an awkward man out situation if that were to be the case, but you still have Charles there. I will say there's one fight that I really do not want to see happen, and I don't think it will, and that is Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria, because I think Ilya mauls Charles. I think it's a terrible stylistic matchup
Really?
for Charles. Because here's the problem with that fight. Charles, he's shown that he gets hit, right? And usually he's able to go and he can pull guard and he can recover. No one will go on the ground with him. We see how hard Ilia Topuria hits. He puts people out. I could see Ilia, his boxing so clean. He's so crisp. He's so powerful. I could see him hitting Charles. If Charles goes to pull guard, that's not going to work with Ilia. We've seen Ilia has a wicked ground game where I just think that matchup, I love Charles, but I think Ilia Topuria is a nightmare of a matchup for Charles Oliveira. So I hope that's not the direction this division goes in, although it's not going to be, as I think Ilya already said, I'm not fighting Charles. But I do like that Gaethje Armin matchup a lot, or Gaethje Charles. I think those are you got to make one of those 2 fights. I don't think Justin Gaethje is deserving of fighting for that lightweight title just yet.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that Armin and Justin Gaethje fight opens up a lot more opportunities for show fights at those top ranks for the UFC. It's definitely a lot more appealing for them, to be able to cash in on all those opportunities rather than, have Justin skip up or have, whatever happen in that top 5 ranking. So yeah, definitely would be an exciting one to watch. Or even, the Charles Gaethje fight was so exciting last time. Charles almost looked like he barely pulled that win off. But he did, and like he always does, everyone always doubts him during the fight, and then he gets it done somehow. So I am a little bit offended you took that stance in the Charles and Ilya fight, though. I do think it's a tough matchup for him. But I think him moving up. Obviously, he walks around at like Topuria walks around at like 185, 190, which is crazy for his size. But I don't know. There's still such a big size advantage in that ring. Ilya as is a pretty small and short, lengthwise guy. I don't know. It'd be definitely be an interesting one to watch. I'm very excited to see Ilya Topuria move up and get to those taller, lengthier guys.
Yeah, I
See
will
how he
say
matches up.
Charles was a former featherweight too, so I mean he has fought down at that division. Maybe
Mhm.
I don't know. I just think Ilya's a tough matchup. But moving on from there, I guess the question, the flip side of the coin is what's next for Rafael Fiziev after that loss. I, you feel a little for Fiziev, because you're on this long layoff and then you go and you take a fight against a brawler and Justin Gaethje on 2 weeks' notice. So I don't really think, he should be punished for his performance. But you look at the rankings and you go, what's next for him? He's probably still fighting in the ranks. There's a couple names that I think can make sense for Rafael Fiziev, one of which being Benoit Saint Denis, who is currently sitting at 15. I think he can make that BSD fight. And then there's 2 guys who are not in the rankings, one of which will be, who is Ignacio Bahamondes. I could see you potentially making that fight, or even potentially Maurício Ruffy, who we saw earlier on the card. So those are kind of the 3 names that I'm looking at for Rafael Fiziev. Although Ruffy and Bahamondes coming up, that's tough, man. Like you almost want to reward Fiziev for taking this fight, but I mean, none of those 3 fights are really too rewarding if you look at them. Do you have any opinions on what you think they maybe do with Fiziev? Maybe you go Beneil Dariush.
I
That seems to
mean,
be more of a favorable matchup.
I just thinking about the Bahamondes and Rufi matchup. Those don't seem like a gimme fight for Fiziev or
No,
for
no, no, no,
anybody
no.
in that division at all.
He might be the
And I
underdog
think
against both of them.
exactly, and especially after how Justin Gaethje was able to just pick him up. I mean Justin Gaethje's fights never go to decision, and he was able to hold on to that. It was a pretty decent fight from him too. That first round he did pretty well. You almost got to give a dog a bone here, man. You got to. I think he's very deserving for a tune-up fight. I mean, he got an injury, came back, lost in decision to Gaethje, and then lost again in decision to Gaethje. So I don't know. I think it's like a really tough spot, and it almost looked like Fiziev was back right before he took this Gaethje fight again. He was in really good form in his last few fights. After his injury. He's such a good talent. It just doesn't make sense to, throw him under the bus again. Unless they want to start using him as a kind of like a gatekeeper, a Jeff Neal, if you will, of the lightweight rankings. Start heat checking people with Rafael Fiziev. I mean, that's also another viable option, but I don't think he deserves that, and I don't think the UFC should do that. If I'm thinking, next fight for him, I think BSD is a really good fight for
I think it's a
him.
fun
One,
fight
he's
too.
in
I
the
think the fans would like to see that too.
100%. And like even BSD fans would be in favor of that fight. I mean, he's coming off, a few losses here in a row. He's still a really good prospect. And if you're on BSD's side, you're kind of almost hoping for that Fiziev fight. Maybe, catch him on an off day, try and get another win under his belt. Maybe keep that loss streak going for Fiziev. Or, on the flip side, Fiziev could just go out there and cook and really get his groove back and then start climbing back up in those rankings because fitness wise, shape wise, he's great, dude. He was looking good in that fight. I mean, obviously it's just Justin Gaethje, bro, and it's on short notice. Like there's really only so much you can do to prepare. But yeah, definitely I think BSD is a great matchup for him. I would definitely shy away from the Rufi fight and the Benavidez or Bahamondes fight if I was him. I always like seeing Paddy Pimblett fight people. I think he's awesome. I think a Moicano fight would also be exciting. I know Moicano's, mentioned that before on his podcast. There's a lot of options here. I don't think we have to go a difficult route for Fiziev's next fight. I think you should, get an easier one. Not an easier one, but, a more winnable fight up next.
Yeah, I like the BST fight. I think that's personally kind of what I'm circling, and I think that'd be a fun fight to make. But moving on, let's talk about Jalin Turner versus Ignacio Bahamondes a little bit. I mean, Jalin Turner did what Jalin Turner does and seemed like he kind of gave up, and he retired for what I don't think is a bad reason, man. I mean, he kind of showed a little bit of a lack of heart, and while Jalin Turner is a fun fighter, it doesn't seem like his heart's in it anymore. And if you're going to be continually taking damage, training and whatnot, I could see why he ended up retiring. But the other side of that coin is, wow, what a fight by Ignacio Bahamondes. That guy is legit.
Shit.
I never really doubted Bahamondes as far as like being a high quality fighter goes. I just didn't think he ever fought the level of competition as Jalin Turner, who has fought multiple top 10 guys. So that's kind of where my skepticism came in. Nothing, skill wise, but Bahamondes is fucking legit, man. And now looking at where he fights next, he's going to go and he's going to climb into the rankings probably around the 12, 13 spot. So he's only going to be looking up. And then with him looking up, I could see them making either a Gamrot fight or Dariush. I like both of those matchups for him. I could see either of those two happening, and they're both very winnable, and they give him a chance to really climb the rankings, Those are two fun fights.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that fight, I mean, as I called it out last Saturday, for last Saturday, I really just didn't think Jalin Turner was in it anymore. And I'm glad he did retire and kind of step back because, against Moicano, he literally gave up. He walked away and gave up. And then again this weekend, you could really see that he wasn't in it anymore. And, for all it's worth, he was a great guy to watch, coming up in the UFC. He had a lot of exciting knockouts, a lot of exciting fights. I always liked them early on, but as he started hitting his head against that, top 15 rankings and all those, really good prize fighters that the UFC has in that division, he just couldn't compete. And it's nothing, against him. It's just the guys in that division are just crazy. I mean, everybody's just so good. You look from anywhere in that top 15 ranking, that's just amazing talent. Any one of those guys could spark any of the other guys' lights out. So, really tough division to begin with. And he's also a pretty, I want to say, lanky guy. It almost, doesn't look as durable as the rest of those guys in that division. And I think honestly that might be what it came down to. A lot harder hitting guys, and obviously Bahamondes was able to take care of that submission as well. So I don't know. I think a submission loss is almost, it's tough. It's tough to say this, but especially given the situation, it was almost like he didn't fight back enough. And obviously that was a really tough. Yeah, no, and it was obviously a really, really tough, spot to be in, especially against a fighter like Bahamondes. But I don't know. I just really didn't think he was there, and I'm glad he's getting out, with his head on his shoulders, to say the least.
Yeah, and I will say, dude, I don't think anybody really expected Bahamondes to go in there and sub Jalin Turner. I think everyone really expected a striking bout, and then he had that arm triangle threatening the armbar there, and yeah, he got him out of there. It looked like Turner kind of wanted to be out of there, and he immediately retired. I know he came out and said he's like, I've been contemplating retirement ever since that Moicano loss, and yeah, I think that just solidified it for him. I've seen some people thinking like, oh, he's gonna end up coming back. I kind of don't think so, man. It looked like he was done. It looks like he wants to, go a different direction, and I don't blame the guy. I'll never, kick someone who actually has, the courage to go out there and fight in the octagon. That's not what I'm here to do. Hats off to Jalin Turner, man. Good for you. Enjoy the rest of your life. No shade thrown on this side.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was just the right time to do it. And UFC is one of those really tough sports to walk away from. I mean, there's so much passion and the everyday grind that goes into that type of training. You really got to leave your heart out there. You even have a tough time watching Tony Ferguson get out there and still stumble his way into the octagon. It's a tough thing to walk away from. A lot of these guys made it out of real tough situations just to be there. And it's tough, very tough to walk away from.
Yeah, and speaking of walking away, that kind of leads me right into the next fight. Someone who should walk away is King Green. Um,
Yeah.
if you saw that Maurício Ruffy spinning back heel kick knockout, first off, hey, what was your Around the Octagon play this week? Ruffy knockout, Ruffy rounds 1 or 2. We walked away with a nice W. Like to see that. But Maurício Ruffy, that guy is something else. But Bobby Green, you need to hang him up, man. You've taken a lot of damage. You've gotten knocked out like 5 times in the past couple years. I think like the last 3 or 4 years, you've 5 knockouts. Um, I think 4 of which have been in the first round. But for Maurício Ruffy, what's next for him? I don't think this will happen, but I don't mind Renato Moicano, man. I think
Ooh.
that is a fight you can make, and I think that is a scary fight for Renato Moicano. I like Renato, but he kind of just got gifted a title shot due to circumstances. He stepped in, he saved a card, but you just got a bone tossed to you. And now I want to see you turn around and see one of these hungry up and comers. I want to see him take that fight. And if it's not Renato Moicano, I think it could be BSD or even Rafael Fiziev. Regardless, it's going to be someone that gives Maurício Ruffy a chance to climb into those rankings. And I think everyone wants to see that because that guy is pure fireworks. And he's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. You just watch how this guy fights, man. He is so much fun to watch with his hands down, karate style striking, and what he's able to do, and just how powerful that guy is. It's impressive, man. I'm a big fan of Maurício Ruffy, and I think that Moicano fight would be a fun one. But I don't know if the two Brazilians will want to match up against each other. But if not Moicano, you have BSD or Fiziev there to give Ruffy a chance to climb into the rankings.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, BSD is a good fight for anybody coming into the rankings right now. He's a very good skill check. Obviously, he's a very proven fighter. He's definitely, deserving of that 15 spot. But being in that cusp really does put you under scrutiny. And after his last few fights, I think like we said last time, he's on his way kind of coming out of the rankings. I can almost see him, start getting tossed to a lot of these up and comers. So I could definitely see that fight. Moicano fight, I can also see that happening. It'd be an interesting one to watch, just given how technical Moicano is. But I wouldn't want to see that. I'm a big fan of both those fighters. Obviously, being from Brazil, I can almost, I love a Dariush fight. I think Dariush and BSD are in the same boat when it comes to up and comers. I think those are two guys that are very beatable for an exciting guy and a guy that's as special as Rufi is. But also, I might bite my tongue for saying this, but I would love a Dan Hooker fight as well. If I think that's
That is a
very high.
tough fight, man.
Yeah, that's a very high jump into the rankings. But just looking through the rankings, top to bottom, I mean, there's a lot of guys, towards between 10 and 15, that they're all kind of Patty Pimblett's got his fight coming up. Jalin Turner obviously is getting out of here. Grant Dawson just made it in the rankings. Obviously, you have Moicano BSD in there. Fiziev just got, saved a card, really, helped save a card. I would be okay with him taking that leap up to Dan Hooker. I mean, and obviously the way he's been, sparking people, putting people out, with the skills that are just unbelievable. That's a video game finish. I could see him making that leap, and I think that would be an awesome fight. Honestly, to be very honest with you, I just want to see Dan Hooker fight and take a beating. So I fucking love that dude, and he can take it like nobody else.
Yeah, I
Pause.
almost think I almost think if we're going to talk Hooker, I think the more likely matchup out of any of them would probably be Bahamondes, given that
Yeah.
Bahamondes will be in the rankings when these rankings refresh. Because he's going to at least go and swap with Jalin Turner, you'll think. So Bahamondes will then be sitting there at that like 13, 12, potentially even a little higher than that. It could be like a 12, 13 because Fiziev lost. So
Hmm.
maybe Bahamondes can jump up and fight Hooker. Like you're right, Hooker's not booked to fight anyone. They could always make that Gaethje fight again. I don't think anyone will ever complain about that, but I almost think Gaethje now is looking higher up than Hooker. So yeah, now you're mentioning Hooker, I can see maybe Bahamondes. I like the Rufi. I really like the Rufi BSD. I see that happening, and I
Hmm.
see them using that as a way to get him into the rankings. Then you can go and find him another kind of favorable matchup a little bit higher up to kind of expedite this guy's process because he is pure fireworks, man.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the only thing that I will say about Rufi is they almost have to move quick on him. He's not the youngest guy. He's not extremely old either, but he only has so many years of prime fighting. Although you think about all the Brazilian fighters, you got Alex Pereira, who's absolutely in his prime right now in his last few fights. You got Glover Teixeira. The reliability of these guys when they get older is crazy because these guys have just been training their whole lives. That's all they know. So they're used to the fire. They're used to feeling beat up a little bit here and there.
You
But
probably
they
get
do
another
have to move
six,
quick.
7 years. You probably get another 6, 7 years out of him now. I think he's like 28.
Yeah, definitely. But when you're thinking about absolute prime, this guy, the output, the exciting fights that we're gonna get, we're creeping into the first few years of
Yeah,
really his peak.
yeah.
And I'm very excited. Regardless of what the move is, I'm very excited to keep watching him fight the next few years.
Yeah, I agree. And then moving down the card a little bit more, we have that matchup. Well, Joshua Van, I guess, will be the next guy you really want to talk about because that was one hell of a performance from Joshua Van. It was a 30-27 across all the judges' scorecards. Now he's on a 3-fight win streak. And you start to think, well, he's going to need his shot to crack into the rankings now. But I'll tell you what, man, those rankings at that flyweight, those are not easy rankings to crack into, man. That weight class is actually pretty stacked if you look at it. You look down in the rankings, and number 15 you have Charles Johnson, who beat Joshua Van by knockout maybe like a year or so ago, maybe a little bit over that. But you can look at that fight, and I don't think anyone would complain if you made that fight again because that was a very exciting fight when it happened too. And Van had his moments. Both guys had extremely high output. So if you want to get him into the rankings, you have Charles Johnson, who's coming off that loss to Timarov. You can make that fight with Joshua Van. And I wouldn't shock me if they went and made that fight, and I could see Van winning. When he took that fight, I think he was 21, maybe 22. He's young, man, and he's only getting better. I know Charles Johnson, prior to that loss, he looked very good. He was on a few fight win streak, but now he's coming off the loss, and let's see if he can fend a guy off who's trying to crack those rankings. I think that is the fight to make next for Joshua Van.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good call. My eyes are more set on Kaya Sakura. I really want to see that guy back in the ring. I think he's super exciting, and this is a good opportunity for both fighters to keep climbing those rankings. Obviously, Kai just had his first UFC fight, for the championship. Um, but you get a guy like you get a guy like Josh Van, almost forgot his name. Um, and he's just like his output's crazy. They're just both really exciting guys. I'd love to see him in the octagon together. And Kai is down, in the 14 ranked spot. So it's pretty viable in my eyes. He Josh Van just had the fight with Sayura. Another Japanese guy, maybe Asakura takes it to the heart. He knocked one of his countrymen out, or not knocked him out, but got him out of there. And I don't know. I think that'd be an exciting fight. I think Kaya Sakura is an awesome guy to watch. You see some of his fights over in the Japanese leagues, and I think he just hasn't been given enough opportunities to put that on display in the UFC. But I do think I think that'd be a fun one. And I think him and Josh Van are two super exciting fighters. But I think you almost kind of got to give him to Charles Johnson just because get that L back and maybe make it even with him.
And yeah, I mean, I think it would be a very fun fight if you were to make that fight with Kai Sakura, but I just don't see Asakura fighting someone out of the rankings. I almost feel like because he has a big following, massive
Yeah.
following in Japan. I almost feel like they're just gonna have him. He's gonna fight someone up. I don't see him fighting down because it won't really propel him up in the rankings. So I almost feel like Asakura is gonna fight someone around that like I don't know that like 6 to 10 range, and then you'll
hmm
have I think Charles Johnson just kind of makes the most sense for Josh Fan. I do think he gets a ranked fight on a 3-fight win streak, and that's really the one that catches my eye, especially because Charles Johnson is coming off a loss, and that was an exciting fight, their first matchup. That's where I'm at. I think that
Yeah.
one makes the most sense to me.
No, it's definitely fair.
And then moving down the card a little bit more, this is kind of the last one I really wanted to touch on, and it is that Bruno Ferreira versus Armin Petrosian fight. That was an interesting fight. Petrosian got a point deducted in the first round for kicking Bruno Ferreira in the nuts a couple times. One of which I don't think hit him in the nuts. The first one looked like it did not hit him. The second one, yeah, that hit him. There's no real denying that. He got the point deducted. I was a little like, Bruno Ferreira hit him in the nuts a couple times. There's no point deducted. But at the end of the day, the point being deducted did not really matter, as Bruno Ferreira was able to find that sub and get Armin Petrosian out of there. Now you're looking at Bruno Ferreira and you go, oh, what's next for him? And I have two names in mind. And those two names are rumored to be booked to fight each other, and those are Bo Nickel and Rainier de Ritter. So although they are booked to fight each other, I could see Bruno Ferreira fighting the loser of Bo Nickel versus Rainier de Ritter, who I think is going to be Rainier de Ritter. That could be where you go with him next. I don't think he's ready for a ranked fight. He's not. He's like 3-2 in the UFC. But you go and let him fight Rainier de Ritter. I think it's winnable. I don't think he wins. But after that, then you can start looking into the rankings and potentially cracking those. I think that's a pretty fun stylistic matchup. So my prediction for the next Bruno Ferreira fight will be the loser of Bo versus RDR.
Yeah, that'd definitely be a good fight to watch, especially, with his ground game against Bo Nickel. I think that'd be an exciting one. I mean, against both guys, I think that'd be an exciting matchup. The first thing that came to mind, though, the first person that came to mind after I watched this fight, seeing Petrosian out there, I saw Roman Kopylov in this guy's
Ooh,
future, and I think that's an
ooh.
exciting fight to make. Kobylov's obviously been hot. He's been been doing well. It's kind of spotty, honestly. But I think it's a good opportunity, especially after the performance he did against the type of fighter that he just did. I think that's a good fight, and I love watching Kopylov fight as well. I'd love to see how these guys match up. It's not Kobylov's only ranked 14. It's not a crazy jump in the rankings at all. Obviously that whole that's in my opinion probably the best division in the UFC. But I think you could do it, and I think that'd be a good fight. I think it'd be a really good skill check for him to really get in those rankings. Although that de Ritter fight also is very winnable for him.
Yeah, actually,
I think
now that I'm thinking about it more, dude, you know what fight I really would like, actually? What about Shara Bullet? Shara Bullet just fell out of the rankings, and I think Bruno Ferreira could be a tough matchup for Shara Bullet, too, man. I could also see
yeah, I
Shara
mean
Bullet putting him out, and chances are he probably will find his chin over the course of a 3-round fight. But I could see Bruno Ferreira really giving Shara Bullet some problems as well, and that could be an interesting fight to make, too.
Yeah, I mean, he's a durable guy. He can definitely take those shots from, he's a bigger built guy. He can definitely, sustain a lot more of those punches from Shara. Especially after you see kind of, MVP not only surviving but winning that fight on the feet. You almost see, if you're Bruno Ferreira, you're like, hey, I can almost, I can see myself surviving this and maybe taking this in points, and if not, submitting him. But yeah, I think Shara takes that fight. I mean, I think MVP was just such a good, perfect matchup really for Shara. Going the distance, having that performance out of both of them, I was, literally standing up watching that whole fight. I just love to see it, but I think Shara definitely takes a fight against Bruno, but I would definitely love to see it.
And
And
Bruno can
almost,
grapple, too. Bruno
yeah,
can
exactly,
grapple. Shara really struggles with the grapplers. I just think
exactly.
at the end of the day, every single fight you start, or every single round you start standing on your feet in front of each other. And I think Shara is just way too unorthodox. And we have seen Bruno Ferreira lose a couple. I think he actually has one knockout loss, but we've seen him get knocked out. And we know how much power Shara has. That I do think he will catch him over the span of 15 minutes. But I think Bruno Ferreira could really, really cause some troubles for Shara Bullet.
Yeah, he certainly poses a threat to him.
And then really the last thing I really wanted to touch on today is I think the judges are absolutely awful. I know we briefly touched on it earlier, but for anyone that watched that Myron Santos versus Francis Marshall fight, you might look at it and be like, oh, Myron Santos briefly or outstruck him narrowly. He did not win that fight. I'll die on that hill. Francis Marshall won that fight, and I really wanted to post a clip of me on Instagram saying take Francis Marshall at plus odds. So those judges went and fucked me out of the satisfaction of doing that. So fuck them even more for that. Francis Marshall won that fight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're back on this topic because they've been spotty over the past year. Not only that, I mean, obviously there's always spotty and sketchy reffing, especially in the fight game. Not everybody sees the same thing. You see it a lot in boxing. Recently, you've seen it a lot in boxing. But UFC, especially Sal D'Amato, it's always his fights, and it's always him that I'm complaining about. I guess not to put him on the spot, but when you're the guy making those decisions, you kind of have to be put on the spot. Um, I don't know, dude. And what worries me the most is that big fight card coming up in Abu Dhabi at the end of the year. Those judges always terrify me. If it's anybody, that's kind of favorable and are kind of on home ground, I almost feel like they have, a point of padding added to their
Dude,
scorecard.
maybe even more than that. They might have 2 rounds sitting there in their pocket. You really never know. I wonder when the days of like AI judges are going to come in to play. You probably think it's going
Yeah.
to be a point. It's probably going to be a thing at some point. I think the most difficult part about that is just like the optics of being like 29-28, 29-28, and you're a winner by split decision. Like it takes away from that whole kind of the show, like the optics. You take away,
Yeah.
the little bit of the carnival experience with that people get excited about. But I'm excited for the days where the winner of the fight wins the fight every time because that's how it fucking should be. And when you see guys get robbed and whatnot, it's terrible. It affects their pay. It affects who they fight next. It affects career trajectory. Like it does all sorts of things that it really just shouldn't. And I feel bad for Francis Marshall in this situation because he did do enough to get the nod and unfortunately did not.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great performance by him. I mean, obviously it's MMA; it's not going to be straight up boxing. So you kind of almost have to weigh in, the how the takedowns and the strikes play into the narrative of the fight. How did the takedowns that he scored in those later rounds, really like dictate what was happening in the fight? And yeah, I agreed. I mean, he had those two takedowns and he had really good control in it too. I have a tough time, it's tough to see, two takedowns in a round versus, however many significant strikes. It's tough to, weigh those out against each other. But I guess, yeah, maybe, maybe this is where AI comes in. But I definitely want to keep it to real judges, and I would definitely like to
Yeah.
see it real judges for as long as possible. It's almost like the chains in football, how they're talking about, doing the kind of VAR system that they have in soccer and other sports. Maybe only bring it out when it's questionable. When that Josh Allen first down, a lot of people argued that it was a first down. Well, we can break that doubt by using the technology we have at hand. But I think for the most part, you do need the chains out there on the field for the same way you need the judges and you need the three different scorecards because that's how it plays. Crazy enough, you get fights where judges even choose different people to win the fight. I mean, sometimes it's like you get split decisions, all the time. So it's super tough to call out fights. And some people weigh in more, on significant strikes. Some people weigh in more on control time. So, it'd be nice to have a universal and solid system for how things are judged. Maybe we don't bring out the AI judge yet, but we definitely need clear rules on what outweighs what in what situation.
Yeah, maybe you bring in some sort of decimal system as well. Like you look at how verdicts, if you like follow their pages, they do their system. By the way, verdict had all 3 rounds in favor to Francis Marshall. Further, just reiterating my point there. But maybe they could do something like that. Yeah, I'm not really too sure. It would be nice for there to be like actual credentials while scoring. Maybe like I wouldn't mind if they showed the score in between rounds so that the
Hmm.
fighters are able to see that themselves as well, because I think that could be very useful. I know some people have touched on that idea. I don't really have a problem with it. You play football, you know what the score is. You play basketball, you know what the score is. You're fighting, you just have no idea until the judges call someone's name. So maybe they do something like that, but
Hmm.
something needs to change. I think the whole UFC is aware of that. All the fans are aware of it. The fighters are aware of it. It's just a matter of when is something actually going to change.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one, fight promotion that I expect to kind of start making those strives in the more advanced era of judging, I think Dana White and the UFC are going to spearhead that. I think boxing is way too big and way too traditional to move back from that. But UFC is a relatively, not to say that it's a new sport because obviously it's probably the oldest sport ever, but it's a relatively big mainstream, new mainstream sport. And they definitely have that, leg room to move in directions and test out, an AI judge, for example, on a live card. And obviously, Dana's always got Zuck in the sidelines watching around the fight. So, they definitely got the connections and the people to make it happen. So I'd be excited to see them, try it out at least.
Yeah, I agree. And the last thing that I really have to say for today, I don't know if you have anything else, but Shout out your boy JJ. Shout out our boy JJ. Big win, 7-0. Nice to see that. I was happy to see that. So congratulations to you. Probably not listening, but not the point. Congrats. Yeah, that's about all I got for today. You have anything else?
No, that's it. Just public shout out to JJ. What a dog. Way to pull out that decision win. For the last fight at the Causeway Bay Hotel in